kind of a relatively short talk about building open source JavaScript libraries. So in one of these 20-minute sessions, you have to keep it really high level. So what I'll do is I'm going to talk about open source JavaScript libraries, how you can build one, and how you can get it distribution. And then I'll put these slides up online afterwards and have a bunch of links to further reading afterwards. So it's kind of an overview on this. Who the hell am I? I'm James. I'm from England. You can probably tell I'm not from the Bay Area from my accent. And I built a company called Bugsnag. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Bugsnag. But before then, I built a bunch of open source software, built a bunch of open source libraries. And I've been coding and building libraries in JavaScript for over 10 years now. It makes me sound a bit old when I say it that way. Yeah, just as I mentioned, I run a company called Bugsnag. We're based here in the Bay Area. And we provide the tools and workflow for software developers to detect crashes automatically in any app that they have. When I say any app, I mean web apps, browser apps, desktop apps, and mobile apps. We have plugins and SDKs for every platform, every piece of software that you're using to automatically detect crashes and put them into our dashboard for you to go ahead and move forward towards a fix. So, starting at the beginning, right at ground one, is what is a library? So this is obvious to most people here, I'm sure, but JavaScript library is a component that you can reuse between applications. So every time you build a product, maybe you want a search box in there, you want an autocomplete box or something like that. You want to be able to reuse that multiple times, because otherwise you're reinventing the wheel. So it just doesn't make sense to build the same stuff from scratch every single time. But people are normally used to using libraries, using other people's libraries, grabbing something off of GitHub and using it themselves. But everyone's innovating, everyone's building something new, so why not take what you've built, extract it out into a library, open source it, and share it with the world? That's what I'm going to be talking about today. So why do that? Why bother? So you can share code between your own apps. I already said this. So you can, if you put something in a library, you can drop it into any JavaScript application that you build forevermore. As long as JavaScript still exists, but I think it's pretty hard to kill at this stage. It's been around for a while. And my personal opinion is that if you share your code with the world, if you extract out a library and you put it out there to the rest of the world, it's the best feeling ever. Not only are you going to get feedback on your project, not only are you going to get people pull requesting and making improvements to it, so your stuff that you're using in your own projects, other people are going to make better, but also you've spent hours and hours and hours putting kind of blood, sweat, and tears into something. Why not give it to other people? If my kind of philosophy is, when building my own projects and when building things with Bugsnag as well, is that if it's not like core product stuff, if it's something that can be useful for other people, why not open source it? Take a little bit of extra time and give it out to the world. It feels great, basically, is the summary on this one. So, creating a library. Now, this is the part I'm going to keep really concise, and I'm going to give you some links for further reading on this, because this is actually, I could talk all day about this, and I'd bore you guys to death. But creating a library. The good news is you can cheat. You can come in and you can use boilerplate. So what does boilerplate mean? Boilerplate is the structure of your repository, a structure of a library that makes it super easy for anyone else to drop this into their applications. So boilerplate typically means the directory structure, the build system if you want to minify it or build it, and anything in between. Sometimes even the testing tools and the testing process. Now, there's something really, really awesome. You guys might already know about this, but if not, check it out. There's this tool called Yeoman. Yeoman is all about building boilerplates and generating skeletons for things. So if you're setting up a new, even a Ruby on Rails application, you can run Yeoman to set up a skeleton. If you're building a new Angular app, a new React app, there are generators available for pretty much anything. And if there aren't, you can build your own generator, which is relatively easy. So what I'm kind of advocating here is don't reinvent the wheel, even when you're building your own library. Use a generator in Yeoman. Super easy to get started. It's got a fun little command line CLI tool called Yo. So when you're starting a new project, you're like, Yo Angular, and it just pulls up your boilerplate and you're ready to go. So again, I'll put these up online afterwards. I'll put them on my speaker deck page. In JavaScript land, you're going to be either building plain old JavaScript library, or you're going to be building a component or a library for a framework. So if you're building a plain old JavaScript library, I'd probably recommend write it in ECMAScript 6 in fresh new sexy JavaScript. And you can do that using this boilerplate up here. That's the Babel boilerplate. So Babel is a way of taking ECMAScript 6 and turning it into old school ECMAScript or old school JavaScript so it runs in any browser. This is the way to go in most projects. But let's say you're building a library for React. You're building a component you want to share with the world for React. There's a generator for that. This is the one that I recommend. And also, let's say Angular. You're building an Angular library, Angular component. There's already a generator for Angular as well. Now, I put these three up here because these are ones I've used in the past and are actually quite good. There are thousands of these. If you want to do something very particular, very specific, someone's already built a generator. You can cheat. You can use their code already. I'd recommend doing that. And then the hard part, which I'm going to ... over, and I'm going to do some further reading on, but writing the actual code. So the good news is once you've set up with Yeoman your boilerplates, you'll have a jump-off point. You'll have an index.js or a main.js or whatever the boilerplate gives you. That's going to be the main place you want to put your code. That's where you want to put your main class. That's what you're going to expose to the world, expose to other developers. So I'm just going to give kind of three maxims, three cheat codes here. Minimize dependencies. It's the worst thing ever when you're pulling in something that sounds really simple, like a little cheeky autocomplete plugin, and you install it, and it pulls in 15 dependencies behind the scenes. I hate it. It stresses me out. It would stress other developers out as well. I'm sure it stresses you guys out when you see all these other dependencies pulling in. Suddenly your JavaScript code has gone from being like 5 kilobytes to 100 kilobytes because it's pulled in Twitter Bootstrap or something ludicrous behind the scenes. Yeah, I've seen a library that does that. So minimize dependencies. Be nice to everyone else. Don't force them to use something else. Even jQuery. You would argue, oh, jQuery is ubiquitous. jQuery is everywhere. If you're just using one thing from jQuery, let's say you're just using Ajax from jQuery, maybe use a cut-down library or a smaller library that just provides that functionality. You don't need to fill up someone's limited JavaScript space, download space with other crap that you're not going to use. Encapsulation, obviously when you're running a library, try and expose only what that library should do. So I'll give an example here. Let's say you're writing, this is kind of just good practice anyway for coding, so you guys know this already, but let's say you're writing a library that's telling you what National Food Day it is today. And you've got some data in there or whatever. You don't necessarily need to expose all the private functions. You don't necessarily need to say, expose the data structures inside. Just give one function or one exposed access to this class, which is your customers are going to use or your consumers of your library are going to use. So like, what food day is it today? Boom, it's National Pizza Day, which was yesterday. Hopefully everyone had some pizza. And then reusable functions and classes. These are just kind of good practices. I'll put a link at the end of this, which is a really, really good tutorial for this kind of stuff. I'm going to gloss over this on purpose because we could talk about this all day long. What I want to talk about is after you've built something that is good and after you want to share it with the world, how do you do that? So everyone always talks about testing. When you're building a library, it's super, super important because you might mess up someone else's code. So testing is super important. There's various schools of thought on this. I love to use Mocha. Mocha.js has been around for a while now, 4 or 5 years. It is solid. The guy who wrote it is a very, very prolific JavaScript developer. And it's really good. It's very easy to use. It's a very declarative way of doing things. So basically you can say, let's say that example of like what National Food Day is it today. You can say, if I put in the date of today, February the 9th, or whatever it was yesterday, it should output Pizza Day. So you can build up your tests in there. It's very easy to do. Include your tests in your GitHub repo for your library. It's easy to do. Everyone else can run it. And also, it allows you to run them automatically whenever you do changes in continuous integration. Again, you guys are probably using something like Travis CI already. If not, check it out. It's the kind of de facto standard for open source projects. And the reason it's de facto standard is because Travis is free for open source projects. So if you're building an open source library, use the free thing. It's very, very good. If you've ever seen on a GitHub repo those little badges at the top that's like build status passing, like big green check mark, they're really cool to put on your GitHub repo unless your tests fail, and then you feel like an absolute failure, and then you want to go and fix it immediately. So it's like a peer pressure almost having this. You're like saying, look how good this is. But if that ever goes red, you're going to get an email from Travis, and you're going to have a red badge of shame on your GitHub repository. So get this set up. It's actually a really good motivating aid for making sure that you're delivering quality stuff to your customers. But also, it's really good for if people are doing pull requests to your library. So if someone's saying, hey, here's an improvement to your library project you've made, Travis will also run tests on their pull requests. So you can say, oh, thanks a lot for your contribution, Jane, but it's not passing tests. Can you clean up the tests before I can merge it? So it's just generally a good thing, especially in libraries. So you've built it, you've tested it, you've got continuous testing happening every time you push code changes. This is where I get quite opinionated about things. If you're building a library, it is not just an afterthought or an optional thing to document it. It is essential. Otherwise, no one's going to know how to use it. No one's going to know the benefits of using this project that you've made, and it's just going to disappear off into the ether, and no one's ever going to know how much effort and time you spent on it. So there's some obvious stuff here, but maybe not obvious to everyone. Put a README file in there and do a really good job of it. So when you're writing a README file, don't just say, here's the name of the project and here's how to install it. You want to convince someone to use it. And it sounds like a weird thing. A lot of software engineers are kind of almost afraid of the concept of marketing. But if you've built something and you're proud of it, you want to convince other people to use it, because then they're going to tell other people about it, and then more improvements come back into your project. So talk about the benefits of it. Talk about why it's going to save you time using this library. Talk about if any other companies or customers or people are using it, maybe they'll give you a shout out in there. It sounds a bit unusual, but it's totally worth it. I actually a little bit of a show of hands I'd like to see. How many people here have picked a library for use in their product or project based on how good the documentation was? Okay, so you can tell how important it is to do that yourself. If you don't do that, people are going to be like, nah, no matter how many stars you've got on GitHub or whatever, if there's no docs, you're just going to ignore it. So that's the README. Everyone's going to jump straight into that README in GitHub. It's the first thing you see. The next thing is, because you're open sourcing this, code documentation is incredibly important. So when I say code documentation, I mean putting comments in line in your code. And you want to do this on a library especially, because other people are going to be using it, other people are going to be improving it, other people are going to be sending you improvements to the product. So my personal favorite here to use is ESDoc, which is relatively new compared to JSDoc, which is, I think, about 15 years old, genuinely. ESDoc is a documentation standard for writing documentation inline in comments that is ECMAScript 6 plus friendly. So you can use all the cool things from new JavaScript, modern JavaScript, by using this library. ESDoc it's called. It's very, very good. So what you can do there is you can write just comments in your code. You can run a script, and that script will generate a whole set of documentation about your code. And example apps. And when I say example apps, I mean more than one. So if you're building a library, presumably you can conceive of more than one situation where this library will be used or should be used. Do an example app for each of those and make it really small and really simple, because you'd be surprised at how many, actually, I could do a show of hands again, but I know everyone will put their hands up. Where's the first place that you go to test if a library is any good? You go and look at someone using it in real life. You view source, you look at how they're using it, you look at how they're actually doing it in real life. So put them in a GitHub repo. So the normal convention is to have 2 folders in your GitHub repository: source, which contains the library's code, and examples. Put an S on there, and it'll force you to do more than one. It's really, really good practice. Also, the coolest thing about writing example apps in a JavaScript library is that it actually gets your imagination flowing. You start saying, what other ways can I use this? How can I improve the interface? How can I add more functionality to this class so that it can go and be used in these other situations as well? When I said I'm opinionated about this, I'm very opinionated about this. Spend as much time writing documentation as you do writing code. And if you follow this rule of thumb, people will find out about it, they'll like it, they'll share it, and they will improve it for you. I actually do this. I check myself whenever I'm writing a new library. I'll be like, okay, now I've written it, yeah, ship it. And then I'm like, no one's going to care. No one's going to know what this is, how to use it, or whatever. So I pretend that I've discovered this library for the first time, and what questions would I have, how would I build this? So when I say writing documentation, I mean these 3 things here. Do a README, make it clear, show off, and don't be worried to kind of puff your chest out a little bit and say, this is cool, I'm proud of this. Write inline documentation and generate a documentation site using something like ESDoc. And build example apps. Build more than one example app. Even if they're 5 lines of code, it doesn't matter. Build more than one. So, you have built it. You've written tests. And you've written documentation. What next? Get it out there in a place that people can download very easily. So, Bower is now pretty much the industry standard repository for JavaScript libraries. It's also incredibly easy to publish to Bower. Again, I've only got a short session. All the docs are on bower.io, and they're really, really good, very easy to learn. But basically what you do is you build your library, and you put a little metadata file in your library that says, I think it's called bower.json, that says, this is the name of my library, this is a description, here's some keywords that you can find it by. What that allows you to do is in any project in future, you can add your library, let's say we're doing the National Food Days library I was talking about earlier, as a dependency to your product. I actually can't think of any project where you would want to have National Food Days as an actual library dependency, but maybe you do that in an example app, you can come up with something cool there. But putting it in Bower means that other people can pull it into their application with 1 line of code. This is the de facto, check it out, it's worth looking into. In fact, look at Bower if you're building an application as well, if you're not already using it. Pretty much everyone's using it these days, but it's a good way to pull in other dependencies as well. It's the way to pull in other dependencies. And the final part, so now you've put it up, it's published, you've got documentation, you've got tests, you've got your code, you've got your library. No one's going to know about it yet. So how do you get that first 1 or 2 or 3 people to find out about it? So the good news is, as you guys all know, because you're here at 4JS, the JavaScript community is amazing. There's millions of people out there who will give you feedback and will share it and want to use it. Some places I would recommend, even if people are afraid of Reddit normally because there's some crazy stuff on there, the JavaScript subreddit is awesome. Everyone in there is super friendly. They'll come back and say, oh, this is great, or have you thought about adding this? Or they'll come up with ideas. They'll come up with ways to improve your product. Maybe they'll come and do a pull request. This is actually my go-to place now. If you do anything JavaScript, put it on the subreddit. It's pretty tight community on there and very inclusive and accepting. Hack and Use is a great one. Everyone on Hack and Use is building something, right? Or has an aspiration to build something. If you're building something, you don't want to reinvent the wheel and do everything from scratch, so you want to use a library. If you're building a library that you think at least you build it because you wanted to use it, that means there are 10, 20, 100, 1,000, a million other people who want to use that same library. Put it up on Hack and Use. The comments aren't necessarily great, and the discourse isn't necessarily great on Hack and Use compared to Reddit, but you will learn a lot, and you get eyeballs on it. And one newsletter that I really like is JavaScript Weekly. First off, if you're not even writing a library, subscribe to this. It's great. You can learn a lot about JavaScript. You get an email in your inbox once a week, and it has all what's new in JavaScript that week. If you've built something and you want to share it with the world, you could probably ping, I've done this in the past, you can ping an email to JavaScript Weekly and say, hey, I've built this thing. Is this something you might want to put out in the newsletter? And you know what? They might do it. And more often than not, they probably will, because it's interesting. If you found it interesting, you're going to use it, other people are going to use it as well. There's also various other, I didn't put the kind of links up here or URLs up here, but in the Bay Area especially, there are so many meetups, JavaScript meetups, framework meetups like Angular, Ember, React. Go down to these meetups if you're interested in sharing things and just be like, do a little quick 2-minute lightning talk, because they have these at the end of each event. You can be like, what did I build this week? So you can be like, look at this great library I built in React. Anyone interested? And what will happen is, this is my favorite thing about the meetup, especially in the Bay Area, is people will come up to you afterwards and be like, I was thinking of building something like myself, or have you thought about extending this for this purpose or this reason? It's the best feeling ever to get other people talking about what you've built and how to improve it. It's just it gets your creative juices flowing. So, because we only had a short amount of time, and I've got to finish up now, this is a really, really good series on how to build an open source JavaScript library. This is not something you can do in a 20-minute talk. This is like a multi-hour kind of video session. It is amazing. I looked at it a couple years ago for the first time, and it's updated really frequently. It's got video guides. It tells you how to set up your structure of your libraries. What it doesn't go into, and which is why I spent a little bit more time on, is how to get it out there, how to get it out into the world, and how to document it. But this is all about actually the building part. So if you want to get started building a library, open source library the first time, this is a great guide. I definitely recommend reading into this. I don't have it, I should have put it up, but it's kind of a meta thing. I'm going to put these slides up on SpeakerDeck. I am speakerdeck.com/loopj, L-O-O-P-J, after the talk, and I'll see if Forward will tweet it out as well so that you guys can check the link on that. And yeah, so had to keep it nice and short. Hopefully it was a quick overview. The one takeaway that I would say for everyone is, if you've built something, share it. You'll be amazed and surprised at how many people were pumped and excited about actually putting it into their projects. Don't be afraid. The community is awesome. Build it, put it out there, and you'll learn a lot about yourself, and you'll get quite excited, I think. So, all right, cool. Come and say hi. We're down in the Sutter room. If you want to get a JavaScript lapel pin, we have some limited edition of that. Come and say hi.